Welcome to Santa Rosa Insider. I'm Renee Bookout. Ecstasy, Four Loko, Spice, K2, bath salts, rave parties. If you haven't heard of these things, you need to stay tuned. If you have heard of them, you also need to stay tuned. We're going to talk about the dangerous implications of these drugs that are legally sold to our children and to adults. We are here at Gulf Breeze Middle School for an educational forum presented to parents, and then later in the week, the students will learn about the dangerous implications of these legal drugs being sold locally here in our community and over the internet. We're going to join the conversation that's already started behind us. Please stay tuned and spread the word.
Just to put a little bit of humor in it, even though there is none, I'm here. It's kind of a long way the way I got here. I'm Dr. Barrineau. I have Dr. Rayme Edler with me. She's an emergency room physician. We're here to spread the word about drugs. This whole conversation came about because of the things we'd seen in our own local community, meaning not Milton, not Pensacola, but Gulf Breeze and Navarre is Spice. Heard some horrible stories about things happening to kids in our community with Spice. Went to Principal Cobb and said, who's telling these kids how dangerous Spice is? You can buy it across the street. Nobody. Half the parents hadn't heard about it. So he agreed to let me come and educate the kids because they weren't being educated, they didn't know anything about it. So what came about from then was, why don't you come and educate the parents as well? I'm really good at talking to the kids. I'll do my best talking to the parents. We're giving you a more straightforward presentation. I'm giving you samples of the music that's going to be involved in the presentation that your kids get, so if they come home and say, hey, Dr. Barrineau played a Getting High song for us. You heard the lyrics. Yeah, it's a Getting High song, but it's encouraging kids in a positive way not to get high. We have to mix some things like this into the presentation because if it's not cool and enticing, the kids are not going to pay any attention. They're going to zone out. So I'm going to mix in some of the things your children are going to see Friday morning, but some of this stuff is pretty heavy and harsh. Location of rave parties, what's going on at the high school, things like that, obviously I'm not going to tell them. But take this information, it is happening in our community, pass it along, pay attention. I think when you see the statistics, you're all going to go home with a big rock in your stomach. Let's start off with alcohol. Alcohol is still a humongous problem in our schools. Anywhere from 15 to 20-year-old, we have statistics on alcohol use. 42% of the high school students try alcohol. If you ask a parent, do you think half of them are going to raise their hand in the room when they say, do you think your kid's drinking? You aren't going to see about 42% of the parents raise their hand. But at least 42% of the high school students are drinking alcohol. 24% are drinking heavily or binge drinking, which means that they're drinking until they're completely wasted or drunk. That's a quarter of the high school. That's a lot of kids. 10% report driving a car after drinking. 10%. That's a lot of kids drinking and driving on the road. I don't know about you, but I lost my best friend my senior year in a drunk driving accident. And I'm sure if we asked you to raise your hand, you've lost a loved one or a friend of a loved one. Even more alarming than the 10% is the last statistic, that 28%, 3 out of 10 in the last month reported to the Center for Disease Control getting in the car with a driver who had been drinking. We preach to our kids, don't drink and drive, don't drink and drive. So then what do? They say, okay, I won't drive and I'll drink. Okay, so then they drink and then they don't know whether or not their driver's been drinking or they don't care. But they didn't drink and drive. Who gets killed in a drunk driving accident? Very rarely is it the driver. For some reason, that driver has to live with that. But the kids in the car usually die. The people they hit often die. So we need to preach, don't drink and drive. But if you go drinking, how are you going to know whether or not your driver's been drinking? But this statistic specifically was very alarming. 40% of kids who start drinking by the age of 13 develop alcohol dependence. Just think about that. We have kids in our schools in the middle school drinking alcohol. 63% say they got their alcohol from their own home or their friend's home. 30% of underage drinkers stated they paid for the alcohol the last time they drank, meaning they gave it to an adult to buy for them. 21% received it from a parent, guardian, or another adult. We're going to get into this as well. This is another alarming statistic. Whites have the highest percentage of underage drinking with alcohol. Asians have the lowest. The leading cause of death for our teens is motor vehicle accidents. 40% of teen deaths are caused from motor vehicle accidents. 37% of those are from speeding, 26% involve drinking. We lose a lot of kids in cars. We talk a lot about drinking and driving. Our generation heard a lot about it, but if you ask the schools, MAD is gone. Mothers Against Drunk Driving, they don't have it. Students Against Drunk Driving, how many of you had SAD in your high schools? Gone. We've kind of stopped educating our kids on drinking and driving. What you're going to find is Dr. Edler is going to let you know from being in enough ERs that the drinking and driving is becoming a tremendous problem. This is a new alcohol available on the market in the last few years. According to some of the information I'm going to tell you I received from my sources. I have had the ability to interview graduated seniors specifically from our community to get some real information on what's going on from people who have left this high school in the last 24 months. So when I tell you this stuff, it is going on. It was going on a year ago. It was going on last year. So pay attention. And it's not just in Pensacola or Milton or Pace. It's in Gulf Breeze. It's disappointing that this is all that's here. When I would ask people about around the community, are you coming? I'd always get, you know, I just don't think my kids do drink and do drugs. Okay, well, I hope they're not the 40%. That's a high percentage. I don't want it to be my kids, but 40% is a lot of kids. Four Loko was first put on the market as a malt beverage with caffeine. It had caused so many deaths and had so many close encounters with deaths that in November they removed the caffeine. However, they have not changed the alcohol content. This one can of alcohol contains 4 to 5 beers worth of alcohol. Okay? This is your high school students' drink of choice right now. According to the last senior that graduated, that I spoke to two, that graduated this past year, quote, extremely easy to get, the kids call it liquid cocaine. And if this wasn't enough alcohol, a lot of kids are adding vodka to it. I'm not going to go into this one as much because I think Dr. Edler will convince you that this is some really dangerous stuff. Until I started doing my research, I did not know that this existed. The other problem that we're having, which has spawned this drink, is that the kids are buying the monster drinks with the excessive caffeine, the 5-hour energies. They're buying the Red Bull and they're mixing it with alcohol. When you mix alcohol an extreme amount of caffeine, the studies are showing that the kids are 4 times more likely to drink and drive because the caffeine numbs the depressive effect of the alcohol and makes them think they're not as drunk as they really are. So they're having a greater incidence now of kids and adults drinking and driving when they go to these bars and they're mixing Red Bull and vodka, monster drinks, vodka, 5-hour energy, and alcohol. It's becoming an epidemic. Pot. God, you think this would be gone by now, but it's not. Marijuana, according to the resources we have with the resource officers, the police, has inundated the Santa Rosa County high schools. It's everywhere, okay? Kids are in the community, they are cooking their marijuana in brownies and bringing them to community functions. 20%, according to statistics for Center of Disease Control, said that 20% of 8th grade students reported having tried marijuana. That's 20% in the 8th grade. 30% of 12th graders surveyed had used pot in the past year. More than 60% stated that drugs were sold, used, or kept at their school. After speaking with resource officers, graduated students in our community, the statistics are pretty level with what I'm hearing. You guys think we don't have drugs in Gulf Breeze, you've lost your mind. We have a lot of drugs. We have a lot of pot. You can now, if you don't know what pot is, you can download an app on your iPhone. You can learn how to roll a joint, smoke a bowl, and you can also find a lot of information about why it's not so bad because it's a natural plant. How do you talk to your kid about a drug that's legal or becoming legal for medical reasons in some states in the United States, like Colorado and California? Well, the biggest problem is, and the way I talk to my personal children about it, is that it's not legal. They don't know what they're getting. Very rarely when these kids buy pot is it just organic pot. It's mixed and laced with a number of drugs, one of which we're starting to see is spice, and you're going to see how dangerous that is. So if your kids want to pull the it's organic, it's no different than tobacco, blah, 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 tell them when it becomes legal, you'll talk about it again when you know that's all they're getting. Because right now it's mixed with a lot of bad stuff. For those of you who are not familiar with marijuana, here are some things you can look for. On the far left is some weed, buds, pot. That's what it looks like, okay? The middle picture is a bag full of hand-rolled joints. If you've got kids smoking pot, watch and see if they have tobacco papers, because they roll their own joints. On the right, the kids are making, this is a homemade bong. I don't know if you know how this works, but you put a little water in the bottle, just put some pot in there and toke it up, takes the heat off so it doesn't burn your throat, apparently. They do it with plastic bottles. They do it with, I saw a honey bear, an empty honey bear someone made a bong out of. They do it a very popular way right now in the high school is to do a crushed can. On the bottom is a Coke can. You crush the can in the center, put a small hole or two, stick the weed on top, smoke through the drinking hole. If you see a crushed can with holes in the middle, in your garbage can, smell it. They might be using it to smoke pot. The middle pictures is what you call a bong. Bong are usually glass. They have a ball at the end. You put water in them and you smoke it through a long pipe at the top. If your kids were to talk about a bowl, it's more like a pipe, and that's what you see on the lower left. These are the most common ways that kids smoke pot. So now you kind of have a better idea of what to look for. Another huge problem, prescription and over-the-counter drug abuse. Right now, the second biggest problem in our schools in Santa Rosa County, besides marijuana and alcohol, is prescription drugs. And they're getting them out of your medicine cabinet. Rates of non-medical use of prescription and over-the-counter medication remain high. 20% of U.S. high school students reported having taken a prescription drug. They're starting as early as age 12. We're seeing it easily in the 8th grade, a little in the 7th. The Partnership for Drug-Free America just recently released some statistics. 1 in 5 teens have abused prescription pain medicines. 1 in 5 have abused stimulants and tranquilizers. 1 in 10 abuse cough medicine. Teens perceive prescription drugs as less dangerous or a safe high. They think the parents take them, the doctor prescribes them, how bad can it be? They're taking them for a number of reasons. It's up to us to educate these kids that they're highly addictive and they're very, very bad. Some examples of the most popular medications which are being abused are Percocet, Lortab, Vicodin, Adderall, Ritalin, Xanax, and Tylenol 3. And again, Dr. Edler will pretty much kick this one home for us. What are they doing with these prescription drugs? You guys are going to have a vocabulary test when I'm done with you today, with all this terminology. Skittle parties. Skittle parties are parties that they have where they take all the pain medication that they have accumulated from their medicine cabinets, from people they babysit for, from their friends' medicine cabinets, and wherever else they can find these pills, and they stick them in a bowl. You go to a party, and everyone takes one. You mix it with pot or alcohol. This is called a farm or a skittle party. Are they happening in Gulf Breeze? Absolutely. Are they happening in Pensacola? Most definitely. Have your kids attended them? If they're in high school, there's a decent chance. Trail mix. If you see the word trail mix, that is a bag with a collection of prescription drugs. someone says bring your trail mix, it's a good chance it's not peanuts, M&Ms, okay? OCs, OxyContin pills, again, a very popular drug, which Dr. Edler is going to talk to you about. Very commonly mixed with alcohol and marijuana. Ends up being life-threatening. If this isn't enough to scare you, go on the internet and type in recipes to get high. And they're going to tell you what to mix with your prescription drugs to get the best high. Okay? 19% of U.S. teens reported taking prescription drugs or painkillers or stimulants to get high. Our other statistic was 20%. So everywhere I've looked, it's been 19 or 20%. That's a lot of kids taking prescription drugs. They're more popular than ecstasy and cocaine. They're considered socially acceptable. They're being used for a number of reasons. Other than just to party and get high, we have a real problem with girls taking them to lose weight. Adderall makes you focus, makes you very productive, and completely eliminates your appetite. Kids with perfection issues are likely to use these because they want to do well and they want to stay awake, and a friend gives them a crushed up Adderall and they can study all night long. And they're not taking them to get high, they're taking them to do better in school. You got to talk to your kids. It's the same thing. In the middle school, even we're seeing excessive use of 5-hour energy, caffeine drinks like crazy. When those stop working, then what are they going to turn to? They're going to turn to Adderall. So pay attention to this stuff and Ritalin. Another problem that we're seeing is kids who are depressed or have anxiety. A lot of kids are taking them who have social anxiety before they go to parties. Let's just take a Valium. Let's take a Xanax, you know. Mom has Xanax. She says that she takes it because she gets stressed out, so they steal a few and they take them before they go to a party to take away social anxiety. That's a huge, huge problem. And in the drug rehab facilities, these are the things that are getting kids addicted. They don't start trying to be bad kids. They're not getting addicted because they want to get high all the time. They're getting addicted because of these other issues as well. So when you talk to your kids about drugs, talk about anxiety, depression, studying, perfectionism, wanting to stay up all night to make the perfect grade. You have to include all of this. The National Institute of Drug Abuse last year stated in the bulletin the increase in pharmaceutical drug abuse among teens to be disturbing, and said farm parties were a troubling trend. Increase in availability of prescription drugs is a big reason for the rise of abuse. In 2005, 3 in 5 kids easily get prescription pain medicine from parents' medicine cabinets. So we got 3 in 5 can get the drugs. And you know they're real good at sharing. You guys, this is really bad, and it's in the high school. In our entire county, it's in the high schools. Nobody is not, there isn't, Mr. Kopp told you, this stuff is out there. There isn't a school without it. And it's not just a few, it's a lot of kids. So let's watch out for these prescription drugs. Let's not become the pill head. The bottom's an example of a bowl of drugs. This is a Skittle party, what they do. This is the cough medicine we talked about, DXM. 1 in 10 kids are doing this. This is real popular for middle school kids. They just drink a whole bunch of it and they have hallucinations. It's a sedative effect. They get euphoria. This is not the same thing as the cold medicine that they put behind the counter for meth production. This is cough syrup, Robitussin. They can buy it, and they chug it. It's called Tussing, is what they call it. Next one. Any of these cough drops? I know I went through my medicine cabinet this week after doing this talk, and I found just about everything in there. Cocaine. Some people think we don't have cocaine. Yeah, we do. Not a lot, but it's there. If you want it in the high school, it's there, and the kids can get their hands on it. It's extremely addictive. Cocaine is one of the most addictive drugs out there. It's smoked, injected, snorted. It's called blow, coke, snow, or flake. According to the Institute of Drug Abuse, 3.5% of 10th graders and 5% of 12th graders. So it probably parallels pretty well with our schools. Side effects, heart rate goes up, an intense feeling of euphoria. They feel like they can conquer the world. They get all this energy and be very productive. And that's one of the reasons that it's so addictive. And you can also go and get an app on your iPhone that lets you play a game where you get to snort cocaine and divide it, and it's called Nose Candy is the app. You can look these up. This is what cocaine looks like. Often it's snorted up through their nose. It's usually use a straw. Some people grow a longer pinky finger and snort it out of their fingernail. But that's generally how it's done. And that's how in the schools I hear it's being done. Ecstasy, I thought this stuff was gone. It's not. It's in the schools. It's mostly in the high school, but it's across the county, but it's there. If you want it, you can find it. It's called the love drug, the club drug, lover speed, clarity beans, hug, atom, E, ecstasy, X. I don't know how, like I said, a vocabulary test maybe we can all study. It comes in the pill form, comes in different colors. When we did the research, Kristin summed it up. It looks like sweet tarts. If you saw a bag of it, it kind of looks like sweet tarts. It has characters on it, like hearts, and we're going to show you what some look like, but they're usually lots of different colors. When the kids take more than one ecstasy pill, it's called bumping. When they're on an ecstasy high, it's called rolling. This is what it looks like. Kind of looks like little tiny sweet tarts. They don't always have the characterizations on the pills, but they're often colorful or do have some kind of imprint on them like that. Spice, this is what motivated this whole talk. This stuff is bad. This stuff is so, so bad. In case you were wondering what it looked like, across the street from the school, I went and purchased some for $6. This is what we have in Gulf Breeze. All the Texacos sell it. So if you want some, it's very easy to get. I sent my youngest looking employee to go and buy it. At one store they were carded and at the other they were not. Here we have Groovy Times Potpourri, Jungleberry, and Serenity Forever Mango. So if you want to look at the packages, they're up here. It's also called K2. It is a synthetic marijuana. It's a designer drug. It's packaged and sold in fragrant incense. It gives a marijuana-like high. It's smoked, snorted, or injected. It came on the market in Europe in the year 2000 and inundated the United States around 2007, 2008. The first generation of these drugs, or potpourri, were in March of 2011, had an emergency ban by the DEA. The only way the DEA can emergency ban anything is if they can prove that it's causing a public health crisis. That's a really big deal for the DEA to get something labeled and banned because it's a public health crisis. But the people producing this spice have got your kids back because they've got lots of other formulas that the legislation cannot keep up with. So every time they ban a new chemical, they just produce another one. So it's out there. The best known two brands are K2 Spice. There are no official studies that have been conducted on the effects on humans. The high is 4 to 15 times more potent than THC, which is the high for drug and marijuana. I'm going to let Dr. Edler finish informing you on all the fun stuff spice causes. One-time use, anxiety, panic attacks, heart's racing, blood pressure goes way up, difficulties breathing, delusions, paranoia, suicide. Those three things are major. Bath salts, ivory snow. This does not go in your bath, but this is what they say you do with it. This is a synthetic cocaine. It has been banned in Florida, but it is still available in some areas. It creates a very high high. It's falsely labeled as bath salts, plant food, insect repellent, and is labeled as the spice, not for human consumption. It is very addictive. It's usually snorted, but it can be smoked or ingested. Here are the names: Purple Wave, Ivory Wave, Energizing Aromatherapy, Down to Earth, White Horse, Kamikaze, Red Dove, Blue Silk, and Vanilla Sky. In the year 2010, they had 301 calls for bath salts. Now you gotta remember, druggies don't call poison control. People wanting to get a high don't call poison control. It's gotta be really bad to call poison control. Kind of like when the druggies walk themselves into the emergency room. It's pretty bad stuff for them to do this. 4 months into 2011. Now, it's 301 calls for the whole year. So in the first quarter of 2011, almost 1,800 calls. Half of them went to the hospital and were admitted. 95%, they said they needed to go. And of the ones that went, 50% were admitted into the hospital. This stuff is really bad. Bath salts, again, heart failure, heart distress, disorientation, seizures, insomnia, paranoia, significant cravings, violent behavior, suicide, and very combative. This stuff is bad. And all these aren't minor manifestations of these symptoms. They're pretty major, and it's just from one-time use. Rave parties in Pensacola. Y'all heard about rave parties? Rave parties, in my opinion, is a parent's worst nightmare. Take everything I've talked to you about tonight, put it all in one place, and there's a rave party. We do have a rave party. The last rave party I heard about was a couple of months ago in Pensacola. It was advertised across Facebook, and all the local high schools from Pensacola and Gulf Breeze, people were there from all those schools, and also from PJC and West Florida. It's hosted apparently by older gentlemen who provide a home, a keg, bongs, and bowls. Now you know what that is. And they have funky music, lots of flashing lights, and they have a party. Apparently the older gentleman that hosts the party, for those of you who have daughters, hit on the girls. And it's just a disaster waiting to happen. So check your kids' Facebook. Often they said it, I said, how do the kids find this out? And what I was told is it's advertised as either a party or a rave party. So if it says rave party, pay attention. If it just says party, make sure you know where they're going. Because it's a disaster. It's going to be a disaster, and it's going to be in our community one of these days. And if I had this talk after somebody died, this room would be full. That's what's so depressing. This room would be completely full if someone had died. Whatever happened to prevention? Whatever happened to taking responsibility as adults to learn what's going on and educating our kids? Why do we have to wait till something bad happens? I'm telling you, something bad's going to happen. The drugs out there right now are too powerful. In summary, these new drugs, spice and bath salts, they give a very powerful high. They're extremely hard to detect. They're easy to find, and they're not illegal. That is a teenager's perfect drug. It's addicting. There's no antidote. The ER doctors will tell you. The withdrawal symptoms are severe. Is it in our community? I think the best way to convince you that it is to turn this over to Dr. Edler, who's been kind enough to volunteer and share with you some ER cases and let you know that we are seeing kids and adults in this community, in Louisiana, and in the region with all these things happening.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Rayme Edler. I'm one of the emergency medicine physicians over at Baptist Hospital. My daughter and I recently moved here from Louisiana. I started when I was 18 years old working with EMS in New Orleans. Worked as a paramedic for 9 years prior to going to medical school. Worked at Charity Hospital. Through my medical training, I've worked at hospitals in New York, Miami, New Jersey. Did my residency training in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and just recently moved to Gulf Breeze. There is quite a bit I can talk to about, many stories I could tell you about, and you can always feel free to come talk to me or ask me questions if you ever do have questions. I know I'm going to try to cover everything that Nicole was saying as well as go through this. As an ER physician, we are nationally seeing 5 to 10 cases per week of what she's describing with the spice, with the bath salts and all this stuff. Just recently, I had a kid that came in and he was profusely sweating. He had his hair all colored purple and red and the dyes just dripping all over the sheets. And I said, what did you do? He says, well, I went and got some salts. And he's like, I just can't stop my heart from racing. He was telling me that he did all these different drugs. He said that he was doing methamphetamines and he was mixing all this together. Then he was taking Valium to try to come off. Well, ironically, his drug test all came back negative. I can't explain it either. So he might have been doing things that he didn't even know he was doing. And I was just sitting here watching his heart rate tack at 140, trying to give him some IV fluids, trying to reverse this with Ativan, but we just have to make sure that he becomes stable. Here that we're looking here, it says that our statistics are similar in Pensacola and Gulf Breeze, and up to 50% of these patients are admitted to the ICU or the psych ward. It's absolutely correct, because this child, I can tell you, fortunately, he actually got better, but I've seen cases with where we're talking about the spice, active hallucinations, and hallucinations that I saw one adult female that was in her 40s that had tried spice that was put, what we call in Louisiana is a physician's emergency committal, is called a Baker's Act here. So when we see somebody that we don't feel is stable, meaning that they're gravely disabled, they could be suicidal or homicidal, we can take their rights against them and have them committed involuntarily into a psychiatric ward. Well, when a patient comes in and they're actively hallucinating and they're not making sense with anything they're saying, then we can put them under one of these commitments. This lady in general, who was in her 40s, was committed into a psychiatric facility for over 5 days with active hallucinations secondary to smoking spice. And that was the only thing that she said she had tried. ICU patients that we're seeing as well. This stuff right here, 4 Loco, unbelievable to me. When I was doing my residency training in Baton Rouge, we had to do an EMS month where we rode along with the paramedics, which I felt right at home going back to that. We're sitting around where they're having Halloween parties last October before they changed the concentration. I guess the caffeine was still in it there. But I picked up a child that was probably about 18 years old, freshman into college, having a big Halloween party, and I was watching his respirations. He was not able to maintain his airway. I ended up having to intubate him prior to getting to the emergency room, from where he went to the ICU for 3 days and stayed in the ICU secondary to drinking this and mixing it with all kinds of other alcohol. There were no drugs in his system. It was straight that. Another case that I had as far as the ICU goes, a nurse and her husband were going to a football game. They thought they'd stop and pick up a drink on the way there. This looked really appetizing. They have watermelon, I think apple, all kinds of different flavors. Had one drink and in the first quarter just went unresponsive. Again, by the time she got to the ER, EMS had already had her intubated. So we were monitoring her, checking her labs, checking everything to see if there's anything else on board. Her husband was swearing up and down. It was the only thing they drank. He couldn't understand what was going on. She started to wake up and started to answer some of our questions. Well, when I answered questions, like, she was shaking her head. So at this point, we decided to extubate her in the ER so that she didn't actually go to the ICU. She was crying. She was utterly embarrassed. She said she doesn't really drink anything. She didn't understand what happened. She was still drunk, and I think her alcohol level came back at about, it was like 140. Legally, what you look at here is anything at 0.8 is what we know as being legally intoxicated, where you can get a DUI. I have yet to see that in the emergency department. What I'm seeing is alcohol levels of over 400, 300. You can't even think that these people are breathing, and I will tell you that there have been kids that have been in high school in this area that have been there with alcohol levels of 200 and 300, which would be like 2%, 3% of your blood by volume is just alcohol. So that's kind of crazy if you think about it, but we are seeing it. The numbers are increasing. When we're going back to talking about the spice and the stuff as far as the I always forget what the stuff is called, but the bath salts, I'm sorry, thank you. They, the average age is 15 to 21, and there are children as young as 13 and as old as 50 that are also using the drug. It's widely available, sold on the internet, the head shops, gas stations, and smoke shops. Again, going back to the bath salts, another one that I saw there, he specifically told me, he said that meth is his drug of choice. He was in a rehab center and had to go to court for some sort of court hearing. So they let him out of the rehab center, and on the way to go back to the rehab center, he stopped at one of these facilities, picked up the bath salts, started snorting it. Came into the ER because his heart rate was just hacking away. He said he couldn't stop the anxiety. He was starting to have these hallucinations. He said, meth is my drug of choice. He's like, this is about 10 times worse than meth. This was his exact words. So we can go to the next one. Okay, so where are they getting it? The internet, Gulf Breeze, Texaco, Psychedelic Shack, the malls. The price is around $6 to $20 a packet, and the price of bath salts $25 to $40 a packet. Like Dr. Barrineau had said, legislation cannot keep up despite the alarming public health issue. New chemicals are manufactured faster than they can be outlawed, and the long-term effects are not known due to the newness of the drug. Now, I will say this, that there are speculations, and I know we can all pretty much assume that there are a lot of carcinogens that is mixed in this stuff. There also, one thing that I did read up on is that when you're looking at marijuana, marijuana is actually a partial agonist on the receptors that we have in our body. So the effects aren't as bad, where they're finding that this stuff is a full agonist, meaning that it is going to have a much stronger and a much longer effect as far as how your body actually reacts to these different things that we're putting into the systems. So here's some case studies that we found on the internet. 2011, Neil Brown, he cut his face and stomach after smoking K2 spice. He survived and made a statement. He said he has tried a variety of drugs, including crack and heroin, but has never had such horrifying hallucinations as when he had took spice. And Brown's comment, "I can't tell you why I did it, the psychological effects are still there." And I've heard that numerous times recently. I heard somebody telling me, just discussing that I was going to be having this lecture, said, "I know somebody that's been in a psychiatric facility for 6 months, still hallucinating. Never had a psychiatric history before." 21-year-old Dickie Sanders, he smoked spice and remained delirious for 3 days under his father's care, who was a physician. The delirium resulted in Dickie's first cutting his own throat, then later shooting himself, which resulted in his death. 18-year-old David Ragazza, he had committed suicide after smoking K2. David apparently freaked out, walked home, and committed suicide. This is a picture of him. Nicole had mentioned, I'm sorry, I keep saying Nicole. Dr. Barrineau had mentioned about alcohol being a big problem. This is a huge problem. I've seen this, and not only is alcohol a huge problem, one thing I'm going to mention as well is texting. A lot of our kids are texting while they're driving, and I can tell you some of the saddest cases I've ever seen from 1 second of texting and looking down, and the next minute your child's gone. While I was in the ICU, I did a pediatric ICU rotation in my residency, and one case I will never forget, and I still follow up on to see how he's progressing to this day, was a child that was riding in the car to school. He was a baseball player. He was the pitcher of a baseball team. He was a great kid. And he was riding in the front seat. His grandmother said he always wore a seatbelt, but for whatever reasons, this time he didn't have his seatbelt on. The girl who was driving was a year older than he was. He was a freshman. She was a sophomore. They were on a two-way highway. She looked down to text for a second. The last words that came out of his mouth was, "We're gonna hit," and the cars just veered in and it was a head-on collision. The girl that was in the other car, she was pretty injured herself. She was in the ICU for several days. The driver, of course, walked away. The person that was in the back seat had walked away, and the child that said, "We're gonna hit," his head went into the dashboard. And from what I remember, initially, going back to thinking about this whole case, his brain started to swell. They had to take a part of his skull off so that they could allow it to swell. When they realized what the consequences were going to be, he was actually brought up for possible organ donation, and the parents weren't ready to give up yet. And I know as a parent, and I think you can put yourselves as a parent, you can only imagine what the family was going through at this point. Well, the family decided to stay by and just hold on to see how he was going to do. He was able, after months and months of being in the hospital, to be discharged home, but he is not the same person that he ever was, and this was all from an incident of texting and driving. So it's just as bad, and these are what the cars are looking like. It happens. So.
We want to thank you guys for coming out, and hopefully we've taught you something here. And spread the word, educate your friends, educate your kids' friends, in case maybe they're not getting the word. Any teenager that's in my house gets a lecture. Anytime, any place. In the car driving to school, on the way back from volleyball, it comes up. So I encourage all of you guys to do the same.
Do you have any questions?
Yeah.
For the kids, the slang. No, I wasn't going to, but I can. But for the parent, I can give a copy of the slideshow to the principal cop, and he can do whatever he wants with it. If you guys want to take it and go wild and present it, go for it. But we'll make it available. That way, some of the stuff in the slideshow, probably not the best thing to put all over the schools, but I'd be happy to give the principal cop and get copies from him. And if you wanted this information, I have to, Kristin Bass here did a lot of research, put together this wonderful presentation for us. And, I gotta tell you, it didn't take us long at all to find all this information, including these most excellent how to roll join apps. And all you gotta do is Google it. It's gonna pop up really, really fast. If I give you guys any advice, go home and type something in that you learned tonight. Just type the word in. You'll be amazed if it comes up. Go to YouTube and type in joint. They'll teach you how to roll it, they'll show you how to smoke it, they'll show you, I mean, it is, drug user 101 is easier now than ever before. Just go home and get on your computer. It's going to tell, I mean, it's mind-blowing what you'll find. But yes, I'll give a copy of the presentation to Mr. Cobb, and you guys can have any of it that you would like. Any other questions?
When you were going over the salts, I saw the ivory stuff. What was the other graphic on that? Pure ivory.
Pure ivory.
So is that like detergent from the detergent oil?
No, they're making it look like, or similar to bath salts or things that you put in your bath to make a soothing bath. Because in order to, they can't legally sell it as synthetic cocaine or pot because then it would be made for human consumption, then the FDA can get involved. But they're selling it and advertising it as potpourri and bath salts. And then because of the internet and the undermarket, and they're able to get the word out, what you're really supposed to do with it, of course, I mean, who would have ever thought, you know, smoke it and snort it, right? So that's how they're getting around it. But they go and they interview these manufacturers for this stuff. There was one on the news where they did an undercover one, and I think it was Prime Time or 60 Minutes, and they went into these places undercover, actually, they were going to buy some. And he's like, I make $500,000 a year selling this stuff, and he's getting all this information, and he goes, well, you know people are smoking this. He goes, well, I don't know what they're doing with it, but I sell it. You know, they don't care. These manufacturers these are not factories, these are warehouses by kids in their 20s and 30s producing this stuff.
Is this spa packages or is it?
Yeah.
I think my favorite part about this is that it says, one thing that I'm going to point out that I think is very funny about this is on the very back of it, it says not for human consumption. So even when the kids do walk out, and I say kids, we're looking 22, 23, 24, one of my favorite things to put on the discharge papers is stop ingesting things that specifically say not for human consumption, because it's right there, and they wonder why they're feeling this bad, or they wonder why their heart rate's at 140. As a hello, like you just need to read the back of the package, it'll tell you. And another thing I forgot to mention earlier is that Dr. Barrineau had brought up earlier about the drugs here as far as Loratab and Percocet and using hydrocodone and oxycodone, and I didn't touch up on that. I can tell you from the different hospitals that I've worked in that here in Pensacola, it is one of the worst that I've seen yet as far as drug-seeking behavior. I have patients that are coming in on a regular basis looking for Loratab and Percocet, and where I was, I said I've been doing this for quite a while now, very deceiving because we're looking at intelligent people that are coming in with great stories where I'm like, wow, okay, I understand. I've been stressed out. I've gone through testing and, here's a little bit of Xanax. I had one situation that happened here where I wrote a girl who was in school, not high school by any means, but in school and studying, underserved situation, a prescription for 9 Xanax. She went to the pharmacy and the pharmacist called me because she changed it to 90. And wrote the words into it. Where I write 9, put it in parentheses 9, close it, she changed it to 0 and added the TY. So it is here one of the worst situations I've seen since I've been here. So I thought I'd add that as well.
What about drugs that kids are putting in drinks? Because I've heard that that's going around the area as well.
Well, okay, so Dr. Barrineau said GHB. I personally haven't seen GHB in quite a few years. I used to see it quite a bit as a paramedic in New Orleans. Just like the principal was saying, is that it was shutting down respiratory systems like this. And what's so unique about this drug is they will stop breathing, but then when they wake up, they're up and they're out. They're just like, okay, I'm leaving. But I haven't seen it as much because it used to be sold, from what I understand, in a lot of health food stores. It was in a lot of products that could be bought there, and it has been completely banned. I know it was called liquid ecstasy. That's another thing we were going to bring up too, is that ecstasy is supposed to be MDMA, and that was originally came out by psychiatrists because it was supposed to help marital couples that were having some problems with their marriage, and we could go into further details here, but we won't because there are some children here. So they have actually taken that off of the market. It started to be sold as pure MDMA, where they started to actually get away from that, and now it's actually stuff that's mixed together, where it's not pure MDMA but still being sold as ecstasy, and what's in it, I have absolutely no idea, but I've had people come in saying they took ecstasy and they're explaining that they're having these dissociations, almost like what we would see in PCP without all the aggression. PCP is not something we see, thank goodness, on the streets anymore, because that is one of the worst drugs I think I've ever seen in my medical history. But they are explaining that they feel like they came out of their body and then went back into their body. So what's in it, I have no idea. Mixing stuff in drinks, yes, rohypnol is one that's real common. They'll put that in the drinks. Kids will pass out, they can get raped. They wake up the next day, they don't even know what happened to them. Did they get raped? Did they not get raped? They're coming into the ER, and it's, do we do a rape exam? Do we not? And there's just been a lot of situations as far as that goes, but it varies.
The evening is wrapping up here at Gulf Breeze Middle School. We'd like to thank Mr. Cobb, the principal, Superintendent Tim Rosdick, and of course the presenters, Dr. Barrineau and Dr. Edler. The conversation is ending this evening, but it must continue in our community. We need to continue to talk about this. We need to continue to educate ourselves and educate our children about the dangers of these drugs. Thank you so much for watching Santa Rosa Insider.